The following video is an appreciation video concerning Generation 8 Ubers. Despite the fact that Calyrex Shadow didn't get banned, this is still a pretty good tier to play, and we'll be going over it in this video. So I've been playing Ubers for since like 2016, I'd say. Aurus Ubers is when I actually played Ubers for the first time, and though I didn't play it that often because I was playing RU back in Generation 6, Ubers has always been a fun tier for me just because of the fact that you can use legendary Pokemon. Moving on to Generation 7, the best Ubers generation in my opinion. You had Arceus, you had Z-Moves, and it was a very fun metagame to play at the time. Mons like Marshadow, Mega Salamence. It was a very varied meta with a lot of strong Pokemon as well, even though Primal Groudon was the most used Pokemon. Gen 7 Ubers was still a fun meta to play. And then we get to Generation 8, and everything changes in Generation 8 because there's two major things that aren't in Generation 8 Ubers compared to Generation 6 and 7. You have no Primal Groudon, no Primal Kyogre, and you have no Arceus forms. So obviously you get into Generation 8, which started in 2019, and you're just like, this is Ubers like never before seen. Like, it's just completely different from the previous generation, and it has that sort of uniqueness about it in terms of the modern generations where Arceus isn't an omnipresent Pokemon, Primal Groudon didn't exist anymore, and it was just a new complete landscape for Generation 8 Ubers at the time. So it did go through quite a bit of turmoil and whatnot. Like, Generation 8 Ubers is a controversial tier. A lot of people that played it in the current gen didn't really like how it ended up in the end, because at the end of the day, the last suspect test that we had, Calyrex Shadow Rider, that was all the way back in 2022, a couple of months before Generation 9 came out. So this was the last attempt to try and fix the tier in some people's eyes, myself included, to be fair, because Calyrex Shadow was a controversial Pokemon ever since DLC 2 came out back in 2020. So we played pretty much 1.5 years, or just a bit over 1.5 years, of Calyrex Shadow metagame, and the fact that it didn't get banned in the end because it didn't have enough votes to get banned in the suspect test just like kind of killed like most people's motivation for the tier. At least like you thought about it. Like, if you look at this, Calyrex Shadow got unbanned, or remained unbanned, on July 14, 2022. That is about 4 months before, Scarlet and Violet came out. So at that point, I think everyone just realized that, we're going to be dealing with a tier with Calyrex Shadow for the rest of, the tier's lifespan. And yeah, some people didn't like that. Some people were happy it stayed. I particularly wasn't happy it stayed, but I still found a way of enjoying myself playing this tier, which we'll be going over later in this video. But like I said, the timeline of Gen 8 Ubers was very tumultuous in my opinion. You had the Dynamax clause, something that happened at the time just to curb all of the legendary Pokemon, because Dynamax was obviously banned from OU very, very fast, but in Ubers it stayed quite a while. It at least had a year's worth of life in Ubers at the time, and Dynamax wasn't a fun mechanic. We all know it wasn't a fun mechanic. Even in Ubers, it wasn't a fun mechanic. The fact that there was a Dynamax clause in general just went to show that Dynamax was a pretty stupid mechanic. I remember at the time, because BDSP wasn't out then, so obviously I was playing PU and that at the time, but like I was still looking back at Ubers because I still found the tier fun, despite even broken Pokemon in Ubers at the time. But it was a thing where I saw the Dynamax clause after taking a bit of a break from Gen 8 Ubers, and I was like, what the fuck is this garbage? Like, why was this an idea? Like, just suspect test Dynamax at that point. Like, why do we need a clause? I don't even remember who was on the clause, like Solgaleo, Reshiram, some other Pokemon at the time. I really don't remember, but DLC 2 came around late 2020, and I remember they're gonna drop the Dynamax clause and suspect as Dynamax, which we saw happening in November of 2020, and then we dealt with Dynamax. The thing got banned very easily. Like, I don't remember the statistics. I'm not bothered to check it up, but just know that a vast majority of the people voted for Dynamax to get banned. No one wanted Dynamax in the tier. So moving on from Dynamax, what happened in Gen 8 Ubers at that point? You still had Zacian Hero, Zacian Crown in the tier, and you also had Calyrex Shadow. So obviously that's what happened next. you know, Zacian Crown got banned overwhelmingly with overwhelming support. Deep that Ubers has a 66% percent of votes to get something banned compared to OU's 60%. You need 2/3 of the voting population to ban something in Ubers. So that just goes to show how much people wanted Zacian Crown gone. Because realistically, you only had Necrozma, Duskmane, and Quagsire as a check, which was pretty funny to see Quagsire coming up just to check Zacian Crown. That was probably Quagsire's highlight in Ubers. It had a pretty solid niche. But yeah, that got banned. And then you see a few months later, Zacian Hero got banned, the one that doesn't have to hold the rusted sword. But yeah, you started to realize that Zacian could just hold a choice band or any other item. And this was pre-nerf Zacian, by the way, so that means it was getting an attack boost on every time it was switching in. Adding the choice band multiplier, and again, this thing was even harder to switch into than the other Zacian. So obviously that also got banned with at least a 66% vote. And then you wait a year and a half at least, or exactly 1 year, and you get the Calyrex Shadow Suspect test, which started on the 2nd of July 2022. So this is at a year and a couple months after the Zacian Hero ban. And of course the Calyrex Shadow discontent was growing because of the fact that it was still just a mon that required Evolto on every single team. You know, the big four of Ubers, like that was what Gen 8 Ubers revolved around, the big four, which was Necrozma, Duskmane, Calyrex Shadow, Yveltal, and Eternatus. Xerneas, you could say there was a big five because Xerneas is Xerneas at the end of the day, but the big four were just those four: Eternatus, Necrozma, Duskmane, Calyrex Shadow, and Yveltal, because they all kind of checked each other in a square sort of thing. Necrozma, Duskmane was checking Eternatus, you know, Yveltal was checking. Well, Yveltal was checking both Necrozma, Duskmane, and Calyrex Shadow, but at the same time, Eternatus could also somewhat check Yveltal just because of the fact that Eternatus had moves like Toxic, Meteor Beam sets, kind of killed Yveltal as well. But, you know, the tier mainly revolved around those four, and obviously you had Xerneas and other ones like Groudon, Kyogre, and like, you know, people started optimizing team building in a sense to, you know, even though you still have to consider Calyrex Shadow in the build at all times, you could still kind of find the variety in the tier. And it's a shame that, like, I would have loved to see a Gen 8 Ubers with Calyrex Shadow banned. I don't think Yveltal would be as omnipresent as it was if this thing got banned, in my opinion. But yeah, so the timeline of Gen 8 Ubers, it might have been weird, it might have just been crazy, but it's still a tier that I love a lot, and I'll show you why I love this tier a lot. Compared to Generation 9, for example. And of course, I'm not trying to bash on Generation 9. You know, it's just not a tier that's... I don't find fun in Gen 9 Ubers whatsoever. And, you know, I could handle Calyrex Shadow being omnipresent in Gen 8 Ubers, because at least Yveltal was a very, very solid check. It didn't have Draining Kiss then. No, I mean, it did have Draining Kiss. Spectra only got Draining Kiss in Gen 9. But it did have Draining Kiss, but at the end of the day, it was still the most consistent check. Yveltal was still a pretty good mon, glue mon in Gen 8 Ubers as well. So, you know, a lot of people like that. That's why I feel like the logic was. At the time, it was like, you know, Yveltal's like the top one mon, is checking a lot of stuff, therefore Calyrex Shadow is not broken, you know. And then people start getting philosophical about, oh, you know, this is Ubers, you know, we really shouldn't be banning anything, you know, like Ubers is the tier where the mons that don't belong in standard play, which is OU. Yeah, like we shouldn't be banning stuff unless it's Mega Rayquaza. And it's still the stupid sort of logic here, and like, you know, philosophical standpoint that people are using to justify not banning Miraidon and Gen 9 Ubers. Again, it's all stupid at the end of the day. Like, tier balance above all else. I don't care about the philosophy of Ubers as a tier. A tier is a tier at the end of the day where we all play. Like, if a mon is broken, ban the mon. Like, why does Ubers have to be held to a different standard? But, you know, that's what people are going to try and argue for, and what can I really do about that? But yeah, looking at my Gen 8 Ubers builder, there isn't that many teams, you know. Like, you're probably thinking, did this guy actually play Gen 8 Ubers that much? Well, I was mainly in other tiers at the time. You know, BDSP was pretty much most of what I was doing throughout, what do you call it, Generation 8. But, you know, when the other tiers like PU started to stagnate for me, and I didn't really find fun in pretty much any other Gen 8 meta, to be honest with you guys. Gen 8 Ubers was there, and I had a lot of fun with it. So let's look at the builder. I had some really fun teams, and you know, I'm gonna go into this folder here. I don't think, yeah, you guys can see the folder, but yeah, as you can see, I have a lot of folders here. But you know, this folder is called Palkia Teams. Now, at the time, when Gen 8 Ubers was the current gen, Palkia was a C-rank Pokemon, and I was like, Palkia is one of my favorite legendaries. I don't know why I really wanted to use Palkia in Gen 8 Ubers, but it was the thing where I saw what the metagame was revolving around. You know, Kyogre was a common Pokemon. You know, Palkia was one of the best Kyogre hunters. So that was a niche for Palkia to fulfill, and it did that niche very well, because you times 4 resist water. Water Spout ain't doing any damage to you unless it's like specs, and even then is about like a low 30%, so it's like a 4-hit KO at best. So, you know, Scarf Kyogre was a common pick as well, and you know, Kyogre was just a Pokemon you had to respect. Like, again, it wasn't part of the big 5 or the big 4, whether you want to add Xerneas into the big 4 or not, but you know, it was still a mon that had to be respected. There wasn't that many good Kyogre answers. Calm Mind was a bit of an annoying set, but Palkia could always handle it, and you know, that's why I saw usage with it, because of the fact that I wanted Palkia to be doing something good, and checking Kyogre was one of its best things. So I had a lot of Palkia teams. I was trying to make this mon work, because I was like, these guys are underrating Palkia's capabilities. Like, you know, you had special sets with a Lustrous Orb, if you didn't want to run choice specs, and then I had a team like this, Scarf Kyogre, Banded Urshifu, you know, before Wicked Blow got nerfed, Zygarde Complete, and like a team like this was pretty fun. But instead of the standard special sets that Palkia was known for, I was running shit like Hone Claw, Scale Shot, and obviously you know, Bulk Up is the better item, but I wanted to run Hone Claws for the reason that Scale Shot will never miss. Now, there's no loaded dice in this tier, so in Generation 8, so obviously I had to pray that Scale Shot would actually get more than 2 hits, but it's still pretty fun as well, because this Palkia, physical Palkia, actually managed to beat Ho-Oh in a 1v1. Like, you could actually, Ho-Oh could actually 1v1 you, because you'd survive Hydro Pump from Palkia pretty easily. I'm not gonna lie, this thing's stats are insane. And then you're Toxic, and then just swap out into your Water Resist. Like, it was very hard for Palkia to actually get past Ho-Oh. But when you're running Lustrous Orb with a +1 attack boost on Stab Aqua Tail, Ho-Oh's getting Oku'd. Like, it was actually pretty fun to see Ho-Oh's getting Oku'd whenever I set up at Home Claws. And you know, Aqua Tail was also perfect accuracy when Hone Claws was taken into account. Now, this wasn't the standard set, and isn't even the standard set to this day. If you go back to Generation 8 Ubers, people are running sub bulk up Palkia to 1v1 Blissey, which, you know, I wasn't really thinking too much about Blissey. I felt like I had enough Blissey answers between Banded Weavile on this team, for example, Evolto just knocking it off and, you know, getting rid of its utility Umbrella or heavy duty boots at that point. But yeah, knock off the Blissey's heavy duty boots, spike up with Ferrothorn, and we'll speak about Ferrothorn later as well. But you know, like, you just get up the spikes, the hazards, and then Palkia can actually go in with Scale Shot, because like, Palkia is not weak by any means. Like, 120 attack is still pretty solid, especially with an item that boosts your dual stab. It was more like a thing that, compared to his 150 special attack that could actually nuke a lot of stuff with Drake and Meteor, your moves base power compared to Drake and Meteor wasn't that high. So obviously having the spike support from Ferrothorn was very useful. Having the secondary Kyogre check as well, like that's why I actually like this team. And as you can see, at the time I had this alt account called Palkia God 97. Now, don't ask me why I called it 97, but as you can see, I was pretty much 1500, 82% GXE, and this was literally me just using Palkia teams, like using all of these teams in this folder. That was just me playing the game, and that was some of the most fun I've had playing Pokemon in Generation 8 and in general, to be honest. I had a lot of fun trying to use a mon that no one respected. And then next thing you know, even the last VR update for Generation 8 Ubers, they finally made Palkia B- because they saw the potential in some bulk up sets. And I just felt like, I'm not going to say I contributed to that, because I wasn't running sub bulk up. I was running Hone Claws so I could have perfect accuracy, Scale Shot, and Aqua Tail. But, you know, I just felt like my efforts were rewarded in the end, because I knew Palkia was him. I saw the potential, and then the player base saw the potential, and it was just like that, innit? To carry on my waffling about Gen 8 Ubers, let's go over some of the main reasons why I actually like it. I mentioned earlier the fact that you kind of had to consider the big four when building, or the big five. Or let's just say the big six, man. Like, I'm adding Kyogre and Xerneas into this mix. But yeah, you had to take the big six into account when team building. And, you know, you're probably thinking, oh, doesn't that sound like quite a restricted and centralizing metagame? And I do have the answer yes to that question, because at the end of the day, Ubers always ends up being very centralized, and especially in other Ubers where there's Arceus involved, because you have so many Arceus forms, you know, Primal Groudon, for example. Like, Ubers has never not been a centralized metagame, and this comes into the philosophy thing I was mentioning earlier about people trying to justify keeping mons like Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and Miraidon in their respective tiers, which at the end of the day I don't agree with, because if something is broken to a certain extent, it is all subjective at the end of the day. But if the player base feel like the mon is too restrictive, just get rid of the mon. You know, like, I wouldn't say ban Xerneas, because again, the burden of proof for banning something in Ubers is slightly higher than standard play. But it's a thing where, like, it's not even like Xerneas isn't that bad. Like, fair enough, it felt a bit stronger in Generation 8 because Primal Groudon wasn't you know, isn't a mon, so you don't have that like fire resist. You still have Pokemon like Ho, you still have Necrozma Duskmane, you still have even something like Megaena, which isn't actually that good, in my opinion at least. But there felt like there were ways of handling Xerneas, and obviously Necrozma Duskmane was part of the big six, so you know, having all those mons trying to check one another and beating one another as well, depending on which angles you're looking at it from, it was a thing where Xerneas didn't feel that bad. Eternatus never really felt broken at all, really. Again, you had Necrozma Duskmane checking it, other dragon types, speed control as well, your own Eternatus as well. So it's a thing like those mons weren't hard to handle, but Calyrex was just in a league of its own, because realistically, Yveltal was the only consistent check. Like, people were running T-Tar, don't get me wrong. People were running T-Tar and Gen 8 Ubers, but it wasn't a good mon, because other than checking Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and, you know, maybe some other Pokemon as well, realistically, it was just checking Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and it just lost to everything else. Like, it lost to Xerneas, it lost to Marshadow, it lost to Groudon. Like, there was not much reason to use T-Tar at all, seriously, unless you felt like, if you didn't want to use a Yveltal, fair, you have T-Tar as your Calyrex Shadow check, but you know, it wasn't a good mon in Ubers. So having a mon like that, you know, it would have been beneficial to have it banned. But what I'm leading on to this point, talking about how centralized Gen 8 Ubers was to an extent, team building options still felt varied. You know, I don't know how it felt so varied when the big six were running around. Like, that's a whole team. You could run the big six on a whole team and you'd have a solid team. just like change the sets a little bit. Like, I don't think you'd lose straight away and feel like your team is badly organized if you just ran the big six on one team. But the team building felt varied. Like I said, I had a whole folder of just bulkier teams, and I got to 1500 with no issues. And at the time, like, top ladder was at least 16 to 1700. Like, it wasn't hard to climb, and team building felt so nice in this tier, despite the fact that Calyrex, Shadow, and Yveltal were like, you know, mandatory add-ons on certain builds. But you know, team building was varied. You had bulky offense. Some people attempted Stool. I don't think Stool was that good, but you know, balance and bulky offense were the best play styles in Gen 8 Ubers. Or I would say balance and hyper offense were actually the best styles in Ubers. Because if you look at my builder here, and I'm not going to say I'm the best builder in Gen 8 Ubers, but if you guys have seen my channel, I have played Gen 8 Ubers. I do have a video actually beating someone like Aberforth in Gen 8 Ubers. But, you know, you have something like hyper offense. Like, you have an Aerodactyl lead with Double Dance, Groudon, Life Orb, Yveltal, Geomancy, Xerneas. Like, this was just all hyper offense. Like, 4 out of 6 members are running Life Orbs. Like, you could actually get away with running HO and just accept that, you know, maybe Calyrex Shadow could end up being an issue, but it's not actually going to be that much of an issue, because you have a Ghost Resistant Yveltal, which is actually bulky. You have a Shadow Sneak Marshadow, and you have probably Rocks Up to break a potential sash on Calyrex Shadow. So, like, you had such cool hyper offense sort of styles in Ubers. You also had OU mons putting in the work. Like, Weavile is A- in Ubers. Like, it's one of the best Pokemon in Gen 8 Ubers, and obviously it was a top Pokemon in Gen 8 OU as well. And it's the thing where, like, the only reason you're seeing a non-Ubers Pokemon in Gen 9, for example, is because you're trying to check Miraidon. Do you think Iron Treads would have any business in Gen 9 Ubers if Miraidon wasn't such a centralizing threat? No, it wouldn't. And the thing is, like I showed you on the Palkia team, you had mons like Ferrothorn, who are also like A rank in Gen 8 Ubers just because of the fact that it's one of the Bersernius checks. It has spikes. It just applies a lot of pressure with Leech Seed. It can stay healthy, and like, it checks Kyogre as well. Like, it was just so fun to see so many Pokemon putting in the work in Gen 8 Ubers, and like, the teams do reflect that. Like, fair enough, I could have a big 6 sort of team or reduce it to like a big 4 sort of team, but you still think, so I could still build with things like Urshifu, Galarian Darmanitan, which is also like an A- mon in the tier. This is a troll team, but you know, there was just variety despite the centralization. There was variety, which is lacking in Generation 9. It's such a shame what Gen 8 Ubers compared to Generation 9 is, and like, it makes me annoyed because of the fact that I've been playing Ubers for at least 8 years across 3 generations, Gen 6, 7 and 8, and Gen 9 is the first time where I just don't want anything to do with Ubers because the tier's ass. Like, it's a shame. And with the I was gonna say Kyogre suspect test, God forbid if that ever happened, but with the current suspect test going on for Miraidon right now, I really hope they don't fumble this. A lot of people in this thread right now are talking about how Miraidon should be banned and whatnot, but like, is that actually gonna happen? Again, 66%, you need 2/3 of the voting population to get that thing banned, and there's a lot of people voting as well, so like, you actually need a decent amount of people to say ban on Miraidon. But I'm hopeful. I do think this is a much clear-cut case than Calyrex Shadow in Generation 8. And obviously, Calyrex Shadow isn't even in Gen 9. Terrestrialization broke that thing completely. But yeah. So yeah, I got my word out. I even built Trick Room in Gen 8 Ubers. Like, this was a pretty fun team to use. Like, seeing Calyrex Ice, because obviously, like, it was a lot worse in Generation 8 because of the fact that it was sharing the slot with Calyrex Shadow Rider, and that was the best mon in the tier, or one of the best mons in the tier. So, you know, it never really saw that much usage, but it's a thing where I had fun with it because it could actually, you know, kill things once it started, you know, snowballing out of control. And yeah, like, again, the team structures in Gen 8 Ubers were very fun and varied in my opinion compared to Generation 9, and it's a shame that I can't play Gen 9 Ubers until the tier just fundamentally changes. Again, I don't like Terra, but it's obviously a better mechanic than Dynamax, but it's a thing where I'm just like, just get rid of Miraidon and Koraidon. Like, I don't want to deal with these guys realistically. And yeah, and for the people saying, oh, they're the box art legendaries, you can't ban the box art legendaries, who gives a fuck? Like, who cares? It's like, people want to come up with the worst logical, you know, arguments to try and keep something in a tier that's clearly blatantly broken. Who cares? Like, again, I'll repeat myself again as much as possible. Better game balance above all else. I don't care about your semantics regarding, oh, Ubers is for the box arts, like, don't ban the box art legendaries. I do not care. I do not care. But yeah, thanks for watching this video, guys. It was just me getting my thoughts out realistically regarding Gen 8 Ubers. It is honestly one of my favorite tiers of all time, and you know, like, a lot of people like shitting on Gen 8 in general, more OU to be fair, but a lot of people just generally like look back at Gen 8 formats with like some disdain just because of the fact that they weren't too fun. It was more a balanced approach, heavy duty boots, all of this stuff. But Ubers is the exception for me, and yeah, I'll always be playing this tier, and if you guys want to play Gen 8 Ubers with me, let me know. I really do want to play this tier. But yeah, thanks for watching, you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.